December 7th, 1941. Just after 8 a.m. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The sky is painfully blue, the kind of calm that feels dishonest in hindsight. Sailors on the deck of the USS Arizona squint into the sun, half awake, boots scuffing steel. Somewhere on Ford Island, a radio crackles. Then the sound arrives. Not thunder, not engines. Screaming metal. A shadow flashes overhead. Red suns on silver wings. And in the next heartbeat, the harbor explodes. You can almost smell it. Burning fuel, cordite, salt water boiling where bombs punch through holes. Men run without orders. Some freeze. Some never move again. The world tilts violently, and America's war begins not with a speech, but with fire. Now, hold that image. Because 23 years later, in 1964, Hollywood would attempt something no studio had ever truly dared before, to recreate Pearl Harbor with the emotional weight of lived memory, while many of the men who survived it were still alive. And that brings us to In Harm's Way. When director Otto Preminger announced the project, veterans quietly paid attention. This wasn't going to be a glossy war adventure. Preminger wanted bitterness, confusion, moral grayness. He wanted to show how war damages people long before it kills them. What most audiences never realize is just how strange and how uncomfortable the making of this film actually was. Here's the first weird fact. The U.S. Navy almost shut the movie down. Preminger demanded unprecedented access, real ships, real naval bases, real hardware. And the Navy agreed, at first. But when they saw the script, things changed. This wasn't midway patriotism. Officers in Harm's Way drink too much. They make terrible calls. One senior officer freezes under pressure during Pearl Harbor, a moment clearly inspired by real, controversial after-action reports. The Navy objected hard. They feared the film made American leadership look human, flawed, vulnerable, and in Cold War America, that was dangerous. Preminger didn't back down. He threatened to expose the Navy's attempted interference publicly, and they blinked. Cooperation resumed, but tensions never fully eased. Some Navy advisors reportedly refused to speak to Preminger on set, communicating only through assistants. That tension bleeds onto the screen, and you can feel it. Second weird fact. John Wayne almost walked away. By 1965, Wayne wasn't just a movie star. He was a symbol. Toughness, certainty, moral clarity. And In Harm's Way gives him none of that. Admiral Rockwell Torrey isn't a swaggering hero. He's wounded early, sidelined, questioned, forced to watch younger officers make decisions while he heals physically and emotionally. Wayne hated that. He argued, loudly. He wanted Torrey to be more decisive, more dominant. Preminger refused. Their clashes became legendary, shouting matches echoing through sound stages, assistants frozen in place. At one point, Wayne reportedly snapped, "Otto, nobody wants to see John Wayne doubt himself." Preminger's reply was ice cold. "Then they will finally see a real officer." Wayne stayed, and it became one of the most restrained performances of his career. Third weird fact, and this one still stings. Several extras during the Pearl Harbor sequence were actual survivors of the attack. Men who had been there. Men who had pulled burned friends from wreckage. Men who hadn't heard dive bombers overhead since 1941. When the mock attack began, the sirens, the explosions, the controlled chaos, some of them broke. One former sailor reportedly dropped to the ground, covering his head, shaking uncontrollably. Filming stopped. Preminger didn't yell. He waited. The man stood up on his own and asked to continue. That pain is real. It's in the background of the frame, invisible, but present. Fourth strange detail. The film quietly killed off more main characters than audiences expected, and often without heroic framing. No swelling music. No final speeches. Just sudden absence. A chair left empty. A name not called at roll. This was deliberate. Preminger believed war rarely offers narrative closure, and he structured the film to deny the audience comfort, a risky move in an era that preferred clear victories and cleaner endings. And then there's a fifth, deeply unsettling fact. One of the film's central romantic subplots was considered scandalous, not because of sex, but because of grief. Patricia Neal's character isn't a love interest in the traditional sense. She's a woman hollowed out by loss, drawn to men who are also broken. Their relationship isn't uplifting. It's messy, sometimes selfish, sometimes cruel. Test audiences didn't know how to react. Was this romance? Or two people clinging to each other in a storm? Preminger didn't explain. He let the discomfort linger. And here's the thing. All of these weird, uncomfortable choices add up to something rare, a war film that doesn't ask you to cheer. It asks you to sit with it, to feel the weight, the regret, the moral exhaustion. But behind the camera, things were about to get even stranger. Because as production moved forward, In Harm's Way began attracting a shadow cast, actors, advisors, and crew members carrying secrets from the real war. Secrets that would quietly shape scenes, lines of dialogue, even deaths written into the script. And one of those secrets involved a real-life command failure, one the Navy never wanted named. Night, black water. Somewhere in the Pacific, 1942. A destroyer cuts through the darkness, both slicing the sea with a low, predatory hiss. On the bridge, an officer grips the rail too tightly. His eyes scan the horizon, searching for a threat he can feel but not yet see. Radar blips pulse softly behind him, imperfect, unreliable, still new to naval warfare. Then it happens. A single shout, a flash beneath the surface. The ship shudders like a struck animal. Steel tears open. Men are thrown from their feet. The ocean rushes in. And the order that should come next, the order that might save lives, never does. This moment, fictional on screen, was not fictional to several men standing just off camera. Here's the sixth weird fact about In Harm's Way. One of the film's most devastating naval failures is based on a real command error, quietly borrowed from classified after-action reports. During World War II, the U.S. Navy documented hundreds of engagements that never made headlines. Escort missions gone wrong. Hesitation on the bridge. Officers overwhelmed by speed, noise, and incomplete information. These reports were not heroic reading. They were brutally honest. Otto Preminger gained access to some of them through unofficial channels. No names, no dates, but patterns. In Harm's Way, when a senior officer delays action, misjudging the threat, underestimating the enemy, it mirrors a real incident in which a U.S. ship failed to zigzag during a submarine-heavy transit. The delay lasted seconds. Seconds that killed dozens. The Navy had buried that lesson deep. Preminger dug it up, and that made advisors deeply uncomfortable. Seventh strange detail. Several technical advisors on set had directly participated in the kinds of failures the film depicts. These weren't historians. They were veterans, former executive officers, gunnery officers, watch commanders, men who had survived decisions they wished they could undo. One advisor reportedly asked Preminger to soften a particular scene, to make the hesitation less obvious. Preminger refused. He wanted viewers to feel the delay, to sit inside it, to understand how silence on the bridge can be deadlier than enemy fire. That silence, that pause, becomes one of the film's most haunting motifs. Eighth weird fact. The film uses sound, or the absence of it, as a weapon. Watch closely and you'll notice something unsettling. During moments of command failure, music disappears. No score, no emotional cue. Just wind, footsteps, distant engines. It's intentional. Preminger believed music told audiences how to feel, and he didn't want to help them. He wanted the discomfort raw, unprocessed, like the real thing. You're not guided, you're stranded. And that brings us to a ninth, rarely discussed detail. The bridge sets were built to exact wartime dimensions, smaller than audiences expect. No cinematic space, no wide heroic framing. Officers stand shoulder to shoulder. There's barely room to turn. When tempers flare, there's nowhere to step away. Actors complained. John Wayne reportedly bumped into railings during early takes, frustrated by the cramped layout. Preminger loved it. That claustrophobia wasn't accidental. It mirrored real destroyer bridges where decisions were made inches from other men's faces. Pressure wasn't metaphorical. It was physical. 10th weird fact, and this one reshaped performances. Actors were instructed to never play bravery. Preminger banned traditional war movie gestures. No chest-puffing speeches. No dramatic pauses before orders. No noble stares into the distance. Orders were to be delivered flat, fast, sometimes awkwardly, the way they were in real combat. If a line sounded too heroic, it was cut. Some actors struggled with this. Others leaned into it, especially Kirk Douglas, whose character walks a fine line between competence and barely contained rage. And here's where the film gets quietly brutal. 11th strange detail. The movie depicts emotional collapse not as weakness, but as inevitability. One officer drinks too much. Another lashes out. Another simply shuts down. Test audiences were unsettled. Where was the redemption? Where was the lesson? Preminger didn't give them one, because many real officers never got one either. Behind the scenes, one advisor reportedly said, "This is the first war movie that feels like what it did to us after the battle." That wasn't praise the studio wanted to hear. 12th weird fact. The studio pressured Preminger to cut 30 minutes, mostly character fallout scenes. Not action. Not battles. Aftermath. Preminger fought. Some scenes stayed. Others were trimmed. But traces remain, in lingering shots, unfinished conversations, glances that last half a second too long. Those fragments matter, because they hint at something darker still, something the film only brushes against, but never fully states. That war doesn't just kill men. It rearranges who they are allowed to be. And that theme would come into sharp focus with one controversial casting choice, an actor whose real-life war experience quietly reshaped one of the film's most emotionally devastating scenes. A man who had faced death not on a ship, but in the air, and whose presence on set made one scene almost unbearable to film. England, 1943. Dawn, under low cloud. A B-17 bomber lifts off a rain-soaked runway, engines coughing smoke into the gray sky. Inside the fuselage, the temperature drops fast. Fingers stiffen. Breath fogs. Somewhere over occupied Europe, flak will find them. It always does. You can almost feel the vibration in your chest. Now cut back to Hollywood, 2 decades later. A soundstage in California. Hot lights. Painted steel. Camera dolly tracks rolling into place. And standing there, adjusting his uniform without saying a word, is an actor who doesn't need imagination to understand fear. Here's the 13th weird fact about In Harm's Way. At least one key cast member was a real World War II combat veteran, and his past directly shaped a pivotal scene. Actor Tom Tryon, who appears briefly but memorably in the film, had served in the U.S. Army Air Forces. He flew missions over Europe. He knew the sound of anti-aircraft fire. He knew the silence afterward. When Preminger staged a scene involving sudden, meaningless loss, a death that arrives without warning, without cinematic preparation, Tryon didn't ask questions. He didn't rehearse much either. Crew members noticed something unsettling during filming. When an attack began, off-screen explosions, shouted orders, Tryon's posture changed. Shoulders tightened, jaw locked, his eyes tracked empty space. It wasn't acting. Preminger noticed, and he rolled camera longer than planned. The result is a moment that feels uncomfortably real, not because it's dramatic, but because it's restrained. The kind of reaction veterans recognize instantly. 14th strange detail. One scene was reportedly filmed in a single take because no one wanted to repeat it. After the take ended, the set stayed quiet. No applause, no joking. Several crew members later said it felt wrong to break the silence. Preminger simply nodded. Moving on. That footage stayed. 15th weird fact. The film's depiction of trauma was ahead of its time and almost named something no one wanted named. Today we call it PTSD. In the 1960s, it was still combat fatigue, battle exhaustion, or quietly ignored altogether. One character shows classic symptoms: irritability, emotional numbness, reckless decision-making, insomnia. The script never labels it, but it doesn't need to. Preminger believed naming it would let audiences distance themselves. Feeling it wouldn't. And then there's a 16th strange detail, subtle but devastating. Several deaths in the film occur off-screen, deliberately denying the audience visual closure. No body, no final breath, just notification, or absence. This mirrors real naval warfare. Men lost in water, in smoke, in compartments that never reopened. Audiences hated it, which meant Preminger had succeeded. 17th weird fact. The film quietly challenges the idea that rank equals moral clarity. Officers make mistakes. Enlisted men show wisdom. Authority shifts moment to moment, depending on who can see clearly through fear. This was not popular. Studio executives worried the film blurred lines too much. Preminger insisted war destroys clear lines. And then comes the 18th strange detail, one that ties the film uncomfortably close to real policy debates of the era. Several strategic arguments in the script mirror real, classified disagreements inside the Navy during the early Pacific War. Whether to engage, whether to retreat, whether saving ships was worth losing time. These weren't hypothetical. They were arguments that had cost lives. Preminger lifted their language almost verbatim from declassified memos, stripped of names, but not tone. The bitterness remains. And now, the 19th weird fact. The film's final act was rewritten after a private screening for senior military consultants. They didn't object to the action. They objected to the implication that sometimes there is no clean redemption, only survival and regret. Preminger softened nothing. One consultant reportedly stood up after the screening and said, "This will make young officers afraid." Preminger replied, "Good." And that leads us to the 20th and final strange fact, the one that explains why In Harm's Way feels heavier than most war films of its era. Because beneath the battles, beneath the performances, beneath the strange production choices, the film is quietly asking a question it never answers. What happens to the men who live through the harm? The film ends. The war continues. Careers move on. But something remains unresolved. And in the final moments, in a look exchange, in a silence that lingers too long, the movie leaves you with a sense that survival itself may be the most complicated outcome of all. And that was the one truth Hollywood wasn't ready to hear.